Genesis 41 is about Pharaoh's dream and Joseph's advancement. And we'll begin by reading that chapter together. And it came to pass at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh dreamed, and behold, he stood by the river. And behold, there came up out of the river 7 well-favored kine, that is, cattle, and fat-fleshed, and they fed in a meadow. And behold, 7 other kine came up after them out of the river, ill-favored and lean-fleshed, and stood by the other kine upon the brink of the river. And the ill-favored and lean-fleshed kine did eat up the 7 well-favored and fat kine. So Pharaoh awoke, and he slept and dreamed the second time. And behold, 7 ears of corn came up upon one stalk, rank, that is, fat and good. And behold, 7 thin ears, and blasted with the east wind, sprung up after them. And the 7 thin ears devoured the 7 rank and full ears. And Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. And it came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled. And he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt, and all the wise men thereof. And Pharaoh told them his dream. But there was none that could interpret them unto Pharaoh. Then spake the chief butler unto Pharaoh, saying, I do remember my faults this day, that is, not remembering Joseph. Pharaoh was wroth with his servants, and put me in ward, the dungeon prison, in the captain of the guard's house, both me and the chief baker. And we dreamed a dream in one night, I and he. We dreamed each man according to the interpretation of his dream. And there was there with us a young man, an Hebrew, servant to the captain of the guard. And we told him, and he interpreted to us our dreams. To each man according to his dream he did interpret. And it came to pass, as he interpreted to us, so it was, me he restored unto mine office, the chief butler, and him, the chief baker, he hanged. Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him hastily out of the dungeon. And he shaved himself, and changed his raiment, and came in unto Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I have dreamed a dream, and there is none that can interpret it. And I have heard say of thee, that thou canst understand a dream to interpret it. And Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, It is not in me. God shall give Pharaoh an answer of peace. That is, Joseph gave credit to God. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, In my dream, behold, I stood upon the bank of the river. And behold, there came up out of the river 7 kine, fat-fleshed and well-favored, and they fed in a meadow. And behold, 7 other kine came up after them, poor and very ill-favored, and lean-fleshed, such as I never saw in all the land of Egypt for badness. And the lean and the ill-favored kine did eat up the first 7 fat kine. And when they had eaten them up, it could not be known that they had eaten them, but they were still ill-favored, as at the beginning. So I awoke, and I saw in my dream, and behold, 7 ears came up in one stalk, full and good. And behold, 7 ears withered, thin and blasted with the east wind, sprung up after them. And the thin ears devoured the 7 good ears. And I told this unto the magicians, but there was none that could declare it to me. And Joseph said unto Pharaoh, The dream of Pharaoh is one. God hath showed Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 kine are 7 years, that is, they represent 7 years. And the 7 good ears are 7 years. The dream is one. And the 7 thin and ill-favored kine that came up after them are 7 years. And the 7 empty ears, blasted with the east wind, shall be 7 years of famine. This is the thing which I have spoken unto Pharaoh. What God is about to do, he showeth unto Pharaoh. Behold, there come 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt. And there shall arise after them 7 years of famine. and all the plenty shall be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine shall consume the land. And the plenty shall not be known in the land by reason of that famine following, for it shall be very grievous. And for that the dream was doubled unto Pharaoh twice. It is because the thing is established by God, and God will shortly bring it to pass. Now therefore let Pharaoh look out a man discreet and wise, and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh do this, and let him appoint officers over the land, and take up the fifth part of the land of Egypt in the 7 plenteous years. And let them gather all the food of those good years that come, and lay up corn under the hand of Pharaoh, and let them keep food in the cities. And that food shall be for store to the land against the 7 years of famine, which shall be in the land of Egypt, that the land perish not through the famine. And the thing was good in the eyes of Pharaoh, and in the eyes of all his servants. And Pharaoh said unto his servants, Can we find such a one as this is, a man in whom the Spirit of God is? And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, For as much as God hath showed thee all this, there is none so discreet and wise as thou art. Thou shalt be over my house, and according unto thy word shall all my people be ruled. Only in the throne will I be greater than thou. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, See, I have set thee over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh took off his ring from his hand, and put it upon Joseph's hand, and arrayed him in vestures of fine linen, and put a gold chain about his neck. And he made him to ride in the second chariot which he had. And they cried before him, Bow the knee. And he made him ruler over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without thee shall no man lift up his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zaphnath-Paaneah, and he gave him to wife Asenath, the daughter of Potipherah, priest of On. And Joseph went out over all the land of Egypt. And Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh, and went throughout all the land of Egypt. And in the 7 plenteous years the earth brought forth by handfuls. And he gathered up all the food of the 7 years which were in the land of Egypt, and laid up the food in the cities. The food of the field, which was round about every city, laid he up in the same. And Joseph gathered corn as the sand of the sea, very much, until he left numbering, for it was without number. And unto Joseph were born 2 sons before the years of famine came, which Asenath, the daughter of Potipherah, priest of On, bare unto him. And Joseph called the name of the firstborn Manasseh, for God, said he, hath made me to forget all my toil and all my father's house. And the name of the second called he Ephraim, for God hath caused me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction. And the 7 years of plenteousness that was in the land of Egypt were ended, and 7 years of dearth began to come, according as Joseph had said. And the dearth was in all lands, and in all the land of Egypt there was bread. And when all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried to Pharaoh for bread. And Pharaoh said unto all the Egyptians, Go unto Joseph, what he saith to you do. And the manner was over all the face of the earth. And Joseph opened all the storehouses, and sold unto the Egyptians, and the famine waxed sore in the land of Egypt. And all countries came into Egypt to Joseph for to buy corn, because that the famine was so sore in all lands. So Genesis chapter 41 opens up with Pharaoh standing by the Nile River. And the Nile River flows out of Lake Victoria, located in equatorial Africa. Its length from there is about 2,300 miles long. The Nile River flows from south to north and empties into the Great or Mediterranean Sea. Most rivers on the earth flow from north to south, but the Nile River flows in the opposite direction. Egypt is called the gift of the Nile because seasonal flooding brings in new soil and nutrients for farming. The Egyptians during Bible times were loath to raise cattle for food, and therefore farming was absolutely essential. Also, the Nile River is one of the objects that the Egyptians worshipped as they worshipped many objects and were extremely idolatrous. Cows and corn. The King James Version interprets that particular cattle as a kine, and kine just means what we would refer today as cattle or cows. The word cattle in the Bible, however, is quite generic. It means basically any herd animal, and we don't necessarily use it in that manner today. Verses 1 through 8, Pharaoh dreamed two dreams which both had the same meaning. Verse 20, 7 healthy and fat kine, that is cows, came from the river and grazed in a meadow. Then 7 ill-favored, that is skinny or poor kine, and approached the fat kine and ate them up. This dream disturbed Pharaoh so that he woke up. When he could go back to sleep, he dreamed again. This time, 7 rank, that is, the word rank there, it means fat or very healthy, and good ears of corn. We use the word rank generally differently today as well. But so these good ears of corn appeared on one corn stalk. Then 7 thin ears appeared on another stalk. These ears are said to have been blasted by the east wind. This wind comes across the parched deserts of Arabia and can destroy crops and people. Arabia is east of Egypt, and this is why the wind is called the east wind. The 7 thin ears of corn devoured the 7 full ears. The people of Egypt were extremely idolatrous at this time and therefore did not have God on their side, and so none of Pharaoh's magicians and wise men could interpret the dream. Look at Genesis 40 and verse 8. And they said unto him, We have dreamed a dream, that is the chief butler and baker, and there's no interpreter of it. And Joseph said unto them, Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me, I pray you. And this is the same principle that Joseph was acting on and faithful to concerning the dream of Pharaoh. So all of this discussion concerning dreams jogged the memory of Pharaoh's chief butler. So the memory of the chief butler is now improved, verses 9 through 13. The chief butler recounted how he now recalled that Joseph was able to interpret both his and the chief baker's dream when they were all in prison together. Furthermore, the butler verified that both dreams came true exactly how Joseph interpreted them. So Joseph goes before Pharaoh, verses 14 through 36. And Joseph readies himself for the presentation, verse 14. The prison where Joseph is staying is here called a dungeon. Dungeons are not conducive to good hygiene. Therefore, Joseph shaved and put on clean clothes, probably made out of Egyptian cotton, before presenting himself to Pharaoh. So Joseph declares the source of Pharaoh's peace, verses 15 and 16. Pharaoh attributed Joseph's talents to the man in verse 15. However, Joseph said, It is not me. God shall give Pharaoh an answer of peace, verse 16. The meaning is, that when Pharaoh hears the interpretation, then he will be at peace. Let us all remember to give God the credit for our talents and many blessings, as Joseph was doing in this case. Then Pharaoh retells the dream, verses 17 through 24. Pharaoh would have well known the difference between a good cow and a bad cow, as this was one of the animals that the Egyptians worshipped. They did not eat them, and this is the main reason why they detested shepherds. An additional detail is added here after the 7 lean cows ate up the 7 fat cows. It did not help their appearance at all. And cows are one of the animals that the Egyptians worshipped. Verse 21. That is, they remain lean and uncomely looking. The dreams concerning the corn stalks here is essentially the same. So Joseph interprets the 2 dreams as one, verses 25 through 32. Joseph said, the dreams of Pharaoh was one, verse 25. That is, the 2 dreams have the same meaning. The 7 kine and the 7 ears of corn are 7 good years of plenty. Verse 26. The 7 ill-favored kine and the 7 empty ears of corn represented 7 years of famine of the 7 good years, after the 7 good years. Verse 27. God has shown Pharaoh concerning the 14 years in his dream. Verse 28. The famine was to be so grievous that the 7 years of plenty would be forgotten. God doubled Pharaoh's dream to help make him know that it is from the one true God. Verse 32. So Joseph advises Pharaoh how to proceed, verses 33 through 36. Joseph advised that one man should be over all the land, with offices in regions under him. During the 7 plenteous years, 1/5 of all crops should be stored in the cities, verses 33 through 35. These stores would feed the land during the 7 years of famine, verse 36. Joseph is appointed man of food during famine, verses 37 through 45, as a result of his wonderful explanations of the 2 dreams that Pharaoh had. So a man in whom the Spirit of God is, and that would be Joseph, verses 37 through 39. Pharaoh liked the advice of Joseph and asked his servants concerning Joseph, can we find such a one as this? Is a man in whom the Spirit of God is. Verse 38. Pharaoh answered his own question. There is none so discreet that is trustworthy and wise as thou art. Verse 39. Joseph would become second to Pharaoh, verses 40 through 44. Pharaoh gave Joseph rule over his house and all the land. Joseph would be second in command of all of Egypt, verse 40. Joseph was now 1 heartbeat from the throne of Egypt. To show this, Pharaoh gave to Joseph his ring, royal apparel, and a gold chain around his neck. With this chain glittering in the sun, Joseph could be seen coming afar off, verse 42. Joseph rode in the second chariot behind Pharaoh so that all the people would know that he was second in command of all of Egypt. The Egyptians cried after him and bowed their knee to him in all of Egypt. The Egyptians had to have the consent of Joseph before beginning any project, verse 44. Joseph's Egyptian name, his wife and work, verse 45. Joseph is now 30 years old. Compare that to the age of our leaders. Turn with me to Philippians 4 and verse 13. Philippians 4:13 says, I can do all things through Christ, which strengtheneth me, a verse that is well used in the athletic world today. But this was the attitude of Joseph, that is, he could do all things through God that strengthened him. And even though he was taken in slavery at the age of 17, and then taken down to Egypt, and he's now 30 years old, and he basically has been in prison for much of that time. He never wavered in his faith, and he was full of optimism, and he spoke in a positive manner. So Pharaoh called Joseph Zaphnath-Paaneah and gave him a wife called Asenath, the daughter of Potipherah, the priest of On. On is a city of Lower Egypt on the east side of the Nile River, about 200 miles from the Great or Mediterranean Sea. On was the seat of worship of the sun, the most prominent god of the Egyptians, but not by no means not the only god. Joseph was surrounded by an idolatrous people, and yet he never swerved to the right or to the left from the one true God. Joseph would have been gone from his wife a lot as he worked throughout the entire land of Egypt. So the years of plenty, verses 46 to 52, gathering of food, verses 46 through 49. During the 7 plenteous years, the earth brought forth abundantly, verse 47. The fifth of all the food was stored, verse 48. The amount of corn was so great that Joseph stopped having it weighed, in verse 49. Those were truly plenteous years. Progeny, Manasseh and Ephraim, that is Joseph's offspring, verses 50 through 52. Joseph had 2 sons born unto him during the 7 plenteous years. Verse 50, they were Manasseh, which means forgetting my toil, verse 51, and Ephraim, which means fruitful in the land of my affliction, verse 52. These 2 would become the 2 1/2 tribes of Joseph. This would ensure that 12 tribes gained an inheritance in the promised land, since the tribe of Levi would not inherit land. Many people ask the question, why isn't there a tribe of Joseph? Well, there is, but it's the 2 half tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh. And then finally, the years of famine, verses 53 through 57. As soon as the 7 years of plenty were ended in the land, here comes the 7 years of famine. It's called dearth in the King James Version. This famine was also in all the lands around Egypt, such as Canaan, Ethiopia, and Arabia would be some of the other lands that was in near proximity to Egypt. They would have been affected by this dearth that was in all the lands as well. However, due to the good planning of Joseph, listening to God's advice, Egypt had plenty. When the people cried for food, Pharaoh told them to see Joseph, verse 55. Joseph would sell the people what they needed so that they did not starve. This would have increased the stature of Joseph in the eyes of Pharaoh, because he would have been further enriched by Joseph's great stewardship, verse 56. Furthermore, all of the countries around Egypt did commerce with them. Joseph's plan, with God's help, worked to perfection. Turn with me to Ephesians 4, 1 through 4. We'll consider these verses Ephesians 4, verse 14. That we henceforth be no more children, tossed to and fro, and carried about with every wind of doctrine, by the sleight of men, and cunning craftiness, whereby they lie in wait to deceive. So Joseph was not deceived by the idolatrous nature of the Egyptians, and he remained faithful unto God throughout all of his hardships. And so the people of Egypt could see God in faithful Joseph, even though probably they did not heed his example. And this is a reminder for us to remain faithful. In this world that we live in, we are surrounded by many unfortunate things that are going on in our lives right now. But we have to remember that we are not to be of this world, and that we are to keep our eye on the mark of the prize of victory, which is heaven itself, and that is something that this world cannot give us. Thank you very much.